So I was planning a real good video, a real heavy hitter for my next video about who really did 9/11 and why. But because the facts surrounding 9/11 I don't think are common to all people, I thought it would be beneficial to lay the contextual foundation in this video so that in the next video we can start on the exact same page before we dig deep into the who and the why. My primary contention in this video is going to be that the World Trade Center buildings 1, 2, and 7 were destroyed by controlled demolition, and that the United States government's official stance that the buildings collapsed due to damage sustained from the plane impact is not true. I have a series of premises that, if true, would lead necessarily to my conclusion, namely that the United States government's official story is completely wrong, so the person who wants to deny my conclusion would have to show at least one of my premises to be false. Premise 1 is that the United States government's official stance on the September 11th attacks is that no bombs are responsible for the collapse of the towers, only the weakening of the structural integrity of the towers due to the plane impacts. Premise 2 is short and sweet. The buildings were brought down by controlled demolition. Therefore, the conclusion follows from the premises that the government's version of the September 11th attacks are untrue, at least in part. Now, it's not surprising to learn that premise 1 is not controversial in the slightest, for the government's official stance really is that the towers fell into their own footprints at freefall speed, due only to the effects of the plane impact on the building structure. So, how about premise 2? Are there any good reasons to believe that there were really bombs in the buildings? Is it reasonable to think that a careful assortment of controlled explosives is what truly brought those buildings down on that tragic day? Let's find out in part 1 of this Black Box investigative special.
Floor by floor instead of popping out.
It was like, if it had detonated.
Detonated.
They were planned to take down a building. Boom, 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 boom.
All the way down. I was watching it and running.
Just like the Twin Towers, most modern buildings are built with a high redundancy factor in terms of structural strength. For this reason, a series of preliminary explosions is normally needed in controlled demolitions to weaken the structure before the actual collapse can be induced.
As the first tower came down, there were a series of explosions. It was like boom, boom. You could hear the echoes of the explosions echoing off the different buildings.
The detonation started, and they went boom, boom, boom. They were a little less than a second apart.
In this shot by ABC Television, the initial explosion can also be heard. Listen carefully after the words FBI agents.
Is as close as we can get to the base of the World Trade Center. You can see the firemen assembled here, the police officers, FBI agents, and you can see the two towers. A huge explosion now raining debris on all of us.
The explosion can be heard even better by separating the stereo track of the microphone from the one of the camera.
Here, the police officers, FBI agents. Here, the police officers, FBI agents.
What happened?
We was in the explosion. We was in the lobby and the third explosion, the whole lobby collapsed on us.
What was it like? What was it like?
Horrible.
It's like hell. You don't want to know.
The whole building just collapsed on us inside the lobby.
Was that a secondary explosion?
Yes, it was.
That was the
Planet probably.
Yeah, definitely secondary explosion. Because we was inside waiting to go upstairs, and on the way upstairs, the whole fucking thing blew, and we just collapsed on everybody inside the lobby.
Similar to the first tower coming down, secondary.
I don't know about the first one, but I know the second was terrible. Then there was a third one too after that one.
Third explosion after that.
That's right. everybody was inside the building waiting to go upstairs, and they just let loose. Everything just let loose inside the building.
So what you told me is that there was a plane or whatever hit the building, then a secondary explosion.
It was like 3 explosions after that. We came in after the fire. We came when the fire was going on already. We was in the staging area inside the building, waiting to go upstairs. And they exploded. The whole lobby collapsed on the lobby inside.
And it's just mayhem after that?
Just man, everybody tried to work their way out.
People don't understand. There may be more. Any one of these fucking buildings can blow up. This ain't done yet.
I think a bomb went off in the lobby. When I was coming through the doors on the other side of the Trade Center, either they blew the lobby up or something, because it blew the glass out of the doors and knocked us all down. And I got smoke and everything on me. I just feel a little shook up because I got blasted, you know.
Doctors treating the injured here say most of the 100 patients treated so far are suffering not just smoke inhalation and eye damage, but fractures. Many of them have told the doctors that they were responding to the attack on the South Tower when they were suddenly trapped by the second explosion in the North Tower. And many of the fractures they're suffering come not from fallen debris, but from the concussive force of the explosion, which slammed them against walls, knocked them to the ground, or slammed them up against their own ambulance.
World Trade Center. Apparently, bombs may have been placed at the base of those buildings.
The FBI most likely thinks that there was a car or truck packed with explosives underneath the buildings, which also exploded at the same time and brought both of them down.
Now, that's the first time we're hearing that. So 2 planes and explosives that were in the building. Is that correct?
That is the working theory at this point.
Then there was a tight sequence of detonations during the collapse of the South Tower, which many described as firecrackers.
You heard a big explosion before the building fell?
I saw it as it was happening, and it sounded as if you had 100 of those little black cat firecrackers and you lit them all off at once. That's what it sounded like.
Because once the tower fell, you heard boom, 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 boom.
And we heard this boom, boom, boom.
But you started with boom, 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 boom. And he goes, how fast? I go, like firecrackers.
Floor by floor instead of popping out.
It was as if they had detonated. As if they were planning to take down a building. Boom, 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 boom.
All the way down. I was watching it and running.
Another element suggesting controlled demolitions are the so-called squibs, the puffs of debris that were noticed on the sides of both towers as the collapses took place. Squibs occur in controlled demolitions when concrete is forcefully expelled from the building by the explosions occurring inside.
The individual explosions that I noticed 20 and 30 and 40 stories below the collapsing structure, those are what we demolitions guys call squibs. And that's another characteristic that seems to be evident.
But for the squibs in the Twin Towers, the debunkers have a different explanation.
A building like that, it's like a giant accordion. It's full of air. When the top of that building comes down, all that air has to come out. And where it comes out the windows. It blows out the windows.
Quanto agli sbuffi, se pensiamo a questi piani che si schiacciano uno sull'altro, l'aria che esce, che porta polvere, fumo e detriti fuori, li spiega abbastanza bene.
The debunkers forget that several squibs were observed 20, 30, or 40 floors below the level of the collapse. In an area where the floors above were still perfectly intact. There is no smoke or concrete to be pushed out here when the collapse has only reached this level at this point. But even in this case, the debunkers have an explanation.
Et ça s'explique justement par la communication des surpressions par les cages d'ascenseur. Alors là, c'est les cages d'ascenseur, mais il y a bien sûr aussi des escaliers. Donc ça aussi, et ça a permis donc cette évacuation de l'air non seulement sur les côtés, mais aussi dans toute la tour, en mettant en pression le bâtiment.
But elevators and stairs have doors at almost every floor. Had there been such a strong compression from above, it would have pushed with equal force on all the floors below, not just the one where the squib occurred. In any case, this is clearly not broken glass. Glass fragments from a window would not even be visible from such a distance. These are high-speed ejections of concrete and other solid debris, which can only be explained by a powerful explosion having occurred nearby. There is even one case in which the expulsion of material, and possibly a human being, takes place before the collapse has begun. Question. Given that what we see is clearly not glass from a broken window, but concrete and other debris, can you explain what caused the squibs observed 30 or 40 floors below the level of collapse?
Explosions that I noticed 20 and 30 and 40 stories below the collapsing structure.
And naysayers tend to say, well, that's just air being blown out the windows. I mean, it doesn't really work to say it's just air pressure. And I've estimated these are coming out faster than 100 miles an hour.
All right, let's take a break. Maybe at this point, some people still aren't convinced. Or maybe they find themselves on the fence. Or maybe they just don't want to believe it. Well, in this situation, not only would a detractor have to tear down my arguments, but he would have to offer his own counter-explanations of these facts that I've presented. Sadly for the detractor, this is not possible. What I'm suggesting here is that there are no other logically possible scenarios, given the facts surrounding 9/11, for explaining how the towers collapsed at free fall speed into their own footprint under a halo of deafening explosions. The fact of the matter is that if you decide in advance to exclude the possibility of controlled demolition, you are left holding a logically incoherent paradox that violates the laws of physics. The person who denies the controlled demolition of World Trade Center buildings 1, 2, and 7 stands as firmly opposed to modern science as the person who says that the Earth is flat. So, is that right? Are there no other possibilities? It had to be controlled demolition? Are my bold claims rooted in sound and well-established science? Let's check it out in part 2, coming up.
The last and possibly most conclusive piece of evidence against the official explanation is free fall. In any case, the near free fall speed of about 10 seconds has been confirmed by different official sources. The 9/11 Commission wrote that the South Tower collapsed in 10 seconds. Mr. Sunder from NIST has confirmed similar timings.
The measurements have indicated that Tower 1 collapsed in about 11 seconds and Tower 2 collapsed in about 9 seconds.
Mr. Sunder has also acknowledged that the towers came down practically at free fall speed.
As a result, the entire top of the building came down pretty much in free fall.
The same admission is present in the official report. Since the stories below the level of collapse initiation provided little resistance, the building section above came down essentially in free fall.
The top section, pushing on the bottom section, it's going to meet equal forces as it goes. Both sections are going to be demolished at the same rate. So by the time you've crushed up 15 stories below it, the top 15 stories are also going to be crushed. And so there's nothing left now to crush the rest of the building.
Something of this kind is what we should have seen when the top section of the towers collapsed onto the lower one. The upper and lower sections should have mutually destroyed each other until all the energy is dissipated and the system comes to a rest. What could not have happened is this.
A little tiny chunk of the building can't possibly fall and crush the entire structure below it.
This is such a simple, fundamental concept that architects and engineers were astonished in seeing it totally ignored by NIST.
This is high school physics, and our whole society is being led to believe that these fundamental laws of physics, hard science, don't apply anymore.
Assuming that the top section on the left contains enough potential energy to destroy the rest of the tower, and assuming we dropped both upper sections at the same time, which one would hit the ground first? It would be the second, of course. As it finds no obstacles in its path, the section on the right would quickly accelerate to free fall speed and maintain it all the way to the ground. The section on the left instead needs to use some of its energy to destroy the structure below, so it could never achieve free fall speed. In the case of the Twin Towers, however, both upper sections fell with an acceleration close to free fall speed, as if their path had been practically free from obstacles. It took each tower between 10 and 12 seconds to collapse to the ground, while an absolute free fall time would have been 9.2 seconds. In other words, both upper sections of the towers found enough energy to destroy 80,000 tons of healthy structure below, while accelerating to near free fall speed. This is, as we have said, absolutely impossible by gravity alone. The law of momentum conservation won't allow it.
A building cannot do free fall with a huge steel structural system in place to support it.
If in fact it actually hit and made an impact, it was effectively crushing anything, pushing hard on this core structure below it, the core structure is going to push back equally hard. And that's what's going to cause the top section of the building to slow down.
As energy is drained away from the system to deform those members, it would slow down the descending mass and cause a descent at less than free fall speed.
There is only one way for those buildings to have collapsed at the speed they did.
The buildings fall at a speed which can only occur if the structure has been removed, the vertical structure.
The same Shyam Sunder from NIST has acknowledged that free fall can only be achieved with the absence of a structure below.
Free fall time would be an object that has no structural components below it.
But what could have removed the supporting structure below, since the falling section didn't have any extra energy to do so?
The fact that it's coming down at free fall says all of the energy is being used to just make it go straight down, which means it's coming down through itself and not breaking up the building as it goes. Something else has to be clearing the way.
There is only one known way to allow that kind of acceleration while removing the supporting structure.
A building cannot do free fall without it being blown up. That's the only way it could come down at free fall.
The only way that a building can accelerate as it collapses is by having pre-engineered, precisely timed, and precisely placed explosives. In other words, controlled demolition.
Dropping the steel block first on the floors that met code deflection yielded a very different result. So I reduced the number of planks which didn't meet deflection criteria, and still the block decelerated and eventually stopped. Dropping about 15% of the floor system on the lower structure always demonstrated a deceleration. I even removed the upper plastic supports to make the falling floors denser. I wanted to make the weakest walls possible, even if it didn't meet deflection codes, so I used paper and matchsticks for my walls. Raising the upper floors and dropping them on the lower floors, I didn't get the results I was looking for. Instead of accelerating down like Tower 1, the upper floors decelerated, even on the weakest of supports. Placing the firecrackers in each floor and connected by a long fuse inside the structure to each one, I stacked the system upwards, leaving the fuse accessible. I lit it and I ran. The problem was, I was using basic fuse and firecrackers, which are very difficult to time and control. But if I had remote control wireless detonators, I think I could replicate the motions they saw. But the force from the pancake and pile driver experiments doesn't match the motions, and therefore it's wrong. Yet my demolition experiment did.
Well, after an honest assessment of the facts, I think it's fair to say that it would be obtuse to suggest that any other means were used to destroy the World Trade Center buildings outside of a carefully and deliberately arranged set of controlled explosives. If you've made it this far into the video, I want to say thank you so much for watching. Hopefully you got a chance to learn something new that you didn't know before. And now that we're all on the exact same page, we can go ahead and jump right into the action next time and talk about who is responsible for this horrific event. Thank you so much. See you next time.
Coming up next. There is no question whatsoever that Saddam is seeking and is working and is advancing towards the development of nuclear weapons. No question whatsoever.
Those weapons of mass destruction got to be somewhere. Nope, no weapons over there. Maybe under here.
One of the generals called me and he said, "Sir, you gotta come in and talk to me a sec." He says,
we've made the decision we're going to war with Iraq. This was on or about the 20th of September. I said, we're going to war with Iraq? Why? He said, I don't know. He said, I guess they don't know what else to do. So I said, well, did they find some information connecting Saddam to Al-Qaeda? He said, no. He says, there's nothing new that way. They've just made the decision to go to war with Iraq. We've got a good military and we can take down governments. So I came back to see him a few weeks later, and by that time we were bombing in Afghanistan. I said, are we still going to war with Iraq? And he said, oh, it's worse than that. He said, I just got this down from upstairs, meaning the Secretary of Defense's office, and he said, this is a memo that describes how we're going to take out 7 countries in 5 years, starting with Iraq and then Syria, Lebanon, Libya, Somalia, Sudan, and finishing off Iran.
The problem is you're not dealing with Iraq alone. You're dealing with a terror network. You're dealing with a system where you have proxies. The two nations that are vying, competing with each other, who will be the first to achieve nuclear weapons, is Iraq and Iran. If you take out Saddam, I guarantee you that it will have enormous positive reverberations on the region.
Benjamin Netanyahu has publicly said the September 11th attacks have been good for Israel. Netanyahu said, quote, we're benefiting from one thing, and that is the attack on the Twin Towers and Pentagon and the American struggle in Iraq.
It has been more than 16 years since a civilian working for the Navy was charged with passing secrets to Israel. Some U.S. investigators believe that there are Israelis again very much engaged in spying in and on the U.S., who may have known things they didn't tell us before September 11th.
Investigators suspect that the Israelis may have gathered intelligence about the attacks in advance and not shared it. A highly placed investigator said there are, quote, tie-ins. But when asked for details, he flatly refused to describe them, saying, quote, evidence linking these Israelis to 911 is classified. I cannot tell you about evidence that has been gathered. It's classified information.
After returning to Israel, Elner claimed on national Israeli TV that they had been sent there to document the event.
And at that point, we were taken for another round of questioning, this time related to our allegedly being members of Mossad. The fact of the matter is, we are coming from a country that experiences terror daily. Our purpose was to document the event.
I used to say, when I was a young senator, I say, if I were a Jew, I'd be a Zionist. I am a Zionist. You don't have to be a Jew to be a Zionist.
My name is Donald Trump, and I'm a big fan of Israel. Believe me, Iran will never have a nuclear weapon, that I can tell you.
Nations, democracies don't go to war easily. Sometimes they have to be bombed into going to war.